Hello everybody, welcome to the Curator's Perspective. This is the Front Articultura Community Art Space, art gallery located in San Isidro, California. Right now we have an exhibition called Teorema. Teorema is an exhibition that uses technology and talks about technology but also about ecology and about the present by speculating of the future. So in the frame of this exhibition is that we are having this conversation with Doreen. Doreen is a curator specialized in digital media, and I think that's the great connection with the exhibition that we have.
Gracias, Francisco. Thank you so much to the front team for the invitation. I was actually able to make it for the opening of Teorema. It was very, very nice for me to re-encounter with Jaime Lobato and with the work of Interspecifics, who have been artists that I have collaborated with in the past, and just, kind of like it felt like jumping a little bit back home to have an exhibition that had their artwork, and also to be able to see other artwork that also complements what they're working on, and the discourses that they have built throughout time. Um, so yeah, I think maybe that's a good way of starting, because what I'm gonna be sharing with you today are three exhibitions I curated. Two of them are very recent, and one of them is from 2017. But when I was doing the selection, I was thinking about, like, well, what is it that I want to share, or what is it that makes sense to share in the context of Teorema and the artworks that are being presented there, but also in the context of understanding what I've proposed for this conversation, which is talking about unstable media and curatorial practices. So yeah, so when Francisco invited me for this conversation, I kept on thinking a lot about, well, how would I, in a way, how would I name my own practice as a curator, but how would I go about thinking in terms of, what has been happening within art, technology, and everything in between, really, because even though art and technology, and let's say the already memified version of thinking around the intersection of art and technology, um, I think a lot about the implications of talking and thinking and researching and working with this kind of artwork from within Latin America, and particularly from within Mexico, because this, of course, um, is understood in a very different way, and it's processed in a very different way, which is one way or another the reason why I'm currently in San Diego. So maybe just to contextualize a little bit about what I do and my own research interests and current practice. I went to architecture school a while ago, so I am formally an architect. And but when I was in architecture school, I realized that I was not particularly interested in the ways in which we, let's say, traditionally understand an architecture practice. Um, I started the bachelor in architecture around 2010. So the conversation around parametric technology, CAD technologies or computer aided technologies, and of course, virtual reality, augmented reality, video mapping, and so forth were very much in the conversation back then. And one of the things that the university where I studied was very interested in was, in a way, trying to grasp what architecture practice or what architecture design would look like in the upcoming years. So for my generation, it was very much about learning how to use the tools that would, quote unquote, be part of the future. Some of them did make it, let's say, into the future and became very interesting to, well, to architecture firms, but also were actually uh, accessible, and did provide something that was different than other kind of tools. But one of the things that I realized while doing this is that, of course, a lot of the things that we understood as architecture and architectural design, if you will, would definitely change, and not necessarily just because of the labor input in a way encompassed in these kind of practices, but also because of the ways in which we relate to these technological tools. So I started thinking a lot about, in a way, why, as architecture students back then, are we being presented with these tools without necessarily thinking about the implications of being presented with these tools, right? So, of course, I learned how to use a lot of things, right? Like, I don't know, AutoCAD or like BIM technologies, like 3D modeling, and all the way into 3D printing and this kind of thing. But I didn't really knew where these technologies were coming from. And some of them really did feel very, I don't know, like very far or very distant from my own reality. I myself am not from Mexico City. I'm from Toluca, which is a small city compared to Mexico City. Of course, everything seems small, but in central Mexico. And coming from a place like Toluca, it seems like certain conversations are very far apart. So when I graduated from architecture school, I was like, well, I'm very interested in these technologies and the way in which these technologies can be used within architecture, but also where these technologies are coming from and what's the perspective around the integration of these technologies within creative practices at large. Um, I did not really have like a close connection to contemporary art. My family is not, particularly invested or interested in art in general. But in a way, I think that I don't know, like I've always been somewhat interested in creative practices, but I didn't really knew how to name these things that I was interested on back then. When I was in architecture school, again, this is like, it's a very large uh, program that you have to go through. It's 10 semesters and, a lot of things happening there. But some of the things that I did realize when I was there was how important creativity is for a lot of fields, from medicine, engineering, of course, all the way into other practices that do actively engage with the conversation around creativity, like, of course, architecture, design, the arts, film studies, and so forth. Um, so when I graduated from architecture school, I was interested in a way, uh, getting a glance of what it meant, to understand artistic practices from within Mexico. So I moved to Mexico City and I started working for an arts, architecture, and design magazine. I don't know how I landed that job, if I'm absolutely honest. I remember just applying for it and they asked me to provide like a text that could make them see, if I was good at writing, basically. Um, and I jumped into this other world and I became fascinated by it. I realized that a lot of the questions and a lot of the conversations that I was interested in having were actually happening within the contemporary art scene in Mexico, and of course in other places as well. But this particular magazine was interested and very much focused in artistic practices from within Mexico. One thing kind of led to the other. I eventually decided to pursue a master's degree in curatorial studies. I realized that that, in a way, made sense. I already knew my way around designing and understanding space and spatial issues in a way. So I was like, yeah, I can learn from it, but I also have some skills that could be very, interesting for something like this. So I went into that, but in the meantime, I developed a project that's called Antimateria, which you can find online as anti-materia.org, where I started writing and doing some research about specifically digital art practices from within Mexico. And I realized that there wasn't really like a big conversation around that. Even from within the arts magazine that I was working for, they were very much interested in the local scene, but they were not really touching in these other artistic communities that were engaging with tools that might still feel very, I don't know, experimental or outside of the traditional boundaries. Of course, later on with time and with a lot of research, I realized that, of course, digital art practices aren't as new as we feel. They just haven't really been processed or theorized as well as other areas. Of course, in comparison to, let's say, painting or sculpture or I don't know, dance or other practices that have been here for longer. Of course, digital art practices do feel, or electronic art practices do feel very recent in comparison. But we're talking about certain artistic practices that have been here for at least 50 plus years, which is, a considerable amount of time to experiment and explore and develop and expand and so forth, particularly within the scenario that we currently have, which is basically, like this super accelerated moment in time where technologies are changing as we speak, basically. Um, so I would say that in a way, those became my main interests. I started researching, I would say organically researching, because I didn't really have a structure for it. But I started talking with people and I started going to exhibitions and I started reading a lot. And in a way, and I realized that there was something there. There was a space for opportunity there. And of course, I was, I think I've always been a geek. I've always liked technology, but I'm also very much aware of the issues that the implementation of certain technologies or even the development of certain technologies can have, particularly within minorities. Um, so yeah, that's, generally speaking, the way in which I started doing what I do right now, which is research and curation for what I would now call unstable media. And I'm very interested in what happens from within Latin America. So I would say those are my fields of interest, but also my fields of knowledge and study and the things that I'm very, very passionate about. So, jumping in, and before going straight into the exhibitions that I want to share with you, and of course, please feel free to, ask, whatever whatever you feel that it's unclear or that you'd like to know more about. I'm happy to expand on anything. Um, so the first thing I would say is maybe grasping what I exactly mean by unstable media. And this is an interesting question because I think that this is one of the ways that I have found a way around um, the tensions between terms such as new media, media arts, electronic arts, digital arts, etc., etc., etc. Because I think that uh, one of the reasons why it has become very, very hard to create or develop theory and, of course, history around these practices, these artistic practices, is the fact that they feel very, very elusive. We cannot really uh, understand them when they are already changing. So, which is something that I find very fascinating as well. But I think that it's precisely that, I don't know, um, exchange or that fluidity or that condition of being always in flux that makes them also very interesting when you know where to look. So this idea of unstable media has to do with, on one hand, the vulnerability of the artworks that are being developed from within, almost particularly digital technologies. On one hand, because the devices that we use are changing again as we speak, but also because the eternal updating of software makes it very hard to keep, let's say, older than 5 years old digital files, right? Like it makes it very, very hard. I don't know if you've had this experience before, but when you have like a hard drive where you have a bunch of files there, and then you try to reopen these files, I don't know, 3, 4, 5, 6 years later after uh, saving them, and then you realize that they are not accessible anymore. I don't know if you've had, that experience of having a corrupted file. And the reason of that is because, there's something there in terms of the materiality of these digital files that makes them very, very vulnerable. Unlike the conversation that normally, a lot of, I don't know, technology companies want you to believe, uh, these digital files tend to be incredibly volatile, incredibly vulnerable. And there's something there, again, that makes them so hard to grasp and makes them so hard to understand. On the other hand, of course, there's the question around planned obsolescence. Planned obsolescence is basically a term that we use or that has been developed within various fields of media theory, basically, that points out to the ways in which the technological devices that we use are designed to eventually fail. By this, I mean our smartphones, wearables, laptops, computers, etc., from the past, at the very least 15 years, have failures, literally failures, designed within them so that after a certain period of time, you have to buy a new one, or you have to buy a new charger, or you have to take it to the to repair or fix these devices. And it becomes more and more obvious and evident that, of course, there's a business that is sustained by us consuming these devices. So that it's very profitable for these devices to have an expiration date, even though the materials that are being used for assembling these devices might very well last for longer. So these two fields, on one hand, the softer part of it, let's say the digital file that is very vulnerable to changes, that is very vulnerable to the ever expanding distribution, but also the corruption of these files is one part of this instability. But then on the other side, the devices in itself, the object, let's say the hardware or the hard part of these technologies is also very vulnerable because it's designed to eventually fail. So this idea of the unstable media is, for me, is in a way reconciling the two sides of these materialities and putting them in tension when we create or think around artistic production that uses these technologies that are very, very vulnerable. So for today, what I want to do is share with you three exhibitions that I've curated. One of them happens, let's say, in a physical space, if you will. The other one happens on an online space, and the third one happens somewhere in between both. I thought these three were interesting examples as to, how I've tried to understand and deal with these unstable media, but also the ways in which we can see what is it that is happening in terms of artistic production within Latin America that deals with this conversation, and that of course allows for other ways of exploring these unstable media and unstable media practices that have a lot to do with something that I find really, really interesting, which is technological disobedience. So the first exhibition is Espacios Líquidos, Políticas de la Pantalla, Liquid Spaces, Screen Politics. This is an exhibition that I curated for the Bienal Universitaria de Arte Multimedial, the second edition of this biennial, so the University Biennial of Multimedia Art for the University of San Francisco in Quito, Ecuador. And this exhibition is currently being presented at the Centro de Arte Contemporáneo, Q Galería in Quito, and it will open a new iteration on the 25th of January at the Museo Nacional del Cacao, which is a whole, it's it was a surprise for me that this exhibition is itinerating there. Just to open a little bit of a disclaimer here. Of course, the current circumstances and the current events that have happened in the last couple of days in Ecuador are very tense, politically speaking. So I just wanted to bear in mind that, of course, this exhibition was developed before what we are facing right now. But in a way, we can see some of the worries that were already present for the artists working on this exhibition. So this exhibition again is part of the second edition of University Biennial, and this biennial started with Byron Toledo, who is a professor and also works directly for Q Galería at the University of San Francisco in Quito. And he started this during the pandemic. He started this in 2020, and we actually met each other in 2020. He was doing an online program, an online exhibition. They recreated the gallery space for the online exhibition. They were having this, let's say, gamified experience or 3D experience for the online shows. And we started talking about that. And then he invited me to become the guest curator for the second edition. And we started working for this second edition, probably somewhere around summer 2021, fall 2021, something like that. And we started from thinking about what could be the topic for the biennial and why this topic could be important. In the end, I told him that I thought that there was something to be said from between Ecuador and, of course, many other places in terms of what do screen politics mean. So this screen politics, of course, for me is let's say it's an umbrella term in order for us to critically talk about the implications of, let's say, automation and labor, but also to think about identity and the body in relation to, let's say, social media or even mental health. Also, the implications of developing or fueling this techno-capitalistic industry, where we are very much aware that a lot of the elements that are being mined or used, or all of the raw material that is being used to create these devices is very literally taken from our land, right? And assembled under very precarious circumstances, very dangerous circumstances, and of course, a very violent and extraction practice. So when we think about screens, of course, we think about propaganda and we think about surveillance and we think about the political and we think about identity, but there's something more complex happening there. So I propose, Byron, why not? Like let's just make that the topic for the biennial. Let's see what the artists here have to say about this. So we wrote together an open call. This open call was for artists based in Ecuador or from Ecuador. They had two categories. One was for artists information, meaning artists, well, students or art schools, not only the University of San Francisco, but also other universities. And then for artists at large, or let's say established artists. So these two categories, of course, were to understand also like the bigger implications or the bigger ecologies of people thinking around these topics, but also it allowed for us to understand the ways in which these ideas are being materialized. So one of the things that was very important for us was to be very vague in terms of what kind of media or techniques could be accepted for the open call. And to our surprise, we got very, very diverse media. So we had applications that ranged from painting, performance, of course, video, art installation, creative coding, sculpture, interactive sculptures, virtual reality, net art. We had, you name it, we had it. And that's something that for me, it was a very interesting symptom of thinking around screen politics, because of course, not only because we're considering to talk about the implications of screens within our life, uh, it means that we have to show these thoughts or these ideas through screens, right? So in the end, what we had is we made a selection of 22 artists, which are the artists that are being named here: Martina Andrade, Rocio Soria Diaz, Andrés Marcial Cobá, Javier Barriga, DMTC Lab, Javier Morales, and Bayro Romero, Estefania Piñeiros, Lanois Forp, Juan Pablo Racines, Hernán Barón, Lux Monsalve, Sofía Costa Barea, Samantha Albuja, Ernesto Salazar, José Luis Cuenca, Control S, Ronnie Albuja, Luis Navas, Carolina Velastegui, Santiago Serrano, Andrea Alejandro Freire, and César Delgado. For me, it's important to name all of them. They are fantastic artists. They developed like a very interesting and complex web of thoughts around what politics of the screen meant for them and the ways in which they approach this through their artwork. So these are just some of the artworks that were presented here. So we had Juan Pablo Racines, who is a painter, who is exploring the out of boundaries spaces within video games. So he has these series of paintings that's called I've Been Hit, where he tries to understand the ways in which the screen outpours into other forms of reality, and particularly from within video games. So of course he has a very strong conversation around how, for instance, the U.S. military weaponized video games in order to bring in new soldiers, basically. So of course everyone who is, driving drones for the military had to have like a very specific kind of training. And a lot of that training happened in video games that were co-designed with the US military. If you want to know more about this is not conspiratory, theory. This is something that actually happened. The development of Call of Duty not all of the versions of Call of Duty, but some of them were co-designed with the US military, which of course is it might not really come as a surprise. So he thinks a lot about that. He thinks, of course, a lot about the weaponization of video games. He is a very avid gamer, and he was very interested in understanding the implications of these spaces as well from outside of the screen. He tried to create these or recreate these spaces through painting because, in a way, for him, he's an art student, by the way. For him, it made sense to uh, preserve these images in a less vulnerable manner, which I thought was a very interesting way of thinking around screens. On the other hand, we have right below these artworks Samantha Albuja with Dispositivos de Intimidad, um, she's also very young, she's also a student. She created this sculpture of her own hands that are tied to these cell phone. And of course, she's reflecting about the ways in which she has found herself tied to these devices, and how sometimes she feels that she's not the one in control. So I think that, for younger generations who in a way have grown with the internet already embedded in every single device, and who just take the internet for granted, who didn't really have to face that transition, these kind of questions I think that are very, very, very important to keep in mind. Are these the contents that I really want to see? Is this the only place where I can get to interact with others? Or is this something that goes beyond my control? So this sculpture piece right here talks about that. And what we see on this other end is Lux Monsalve's Memoria del Tacto. He created something that I found really, really interesting. Lux is a more established artist. He has been working with technology for a long time, and he created diary of digitized objects. So everyday objects that he collected throughout a specific period in his life, from shells to stones to bits of coral pieces, bones, and so forth. Then he digitized these objects, and he created like this new entity from taking elements from these digital versions or these digital twins from objects that he has gathered in the past. And then he created this theremin-like instrument that transforms 3D files into sound. So he's basically exploring the ways in which the translation, let's say, between the object, the physical object, if you will, and the digitized object become an expansion of the object in itself. And a lot of these expansions do not really have to do with the object, the original object, if you will. Of course, we had things like VR with Martin Andrade and What If Dying Offline is Unavailable, AI as well, with this installation that I also thought was really, really interesting by Javier Morales and Mayro Romero, where they basically they put together, they've created an artificial intelligence model that was fed with their childhood memories, childhood images, and they created hybrids of their own memories. They were not really, exploring specifically AI and the possibilities around AI and creativity, but rather the creation of fake memories and how photographies in themselves are already fake memories. Luis Navas with Más allá del colapso and Rosia Soria with the Screen and Shell. They both have, I really wanted to have these two here because they are both talking about rituals with different ways of approaching the materialities of the ritual, which I also thought was very interesting. So for both of them, it has to do with extraction and the ways in which a lot of these technological devices start from these raw materials being mined in Ecuador and in Latin America, assembled somewhere in normally China, but also, Indonesia. And then, you know, they get back to us in the form and shape of these technological devices, but later on also as toxic waste, particularly toxic waste that comes from the US and Canada and that lands in Latin America. So they're talking about that cycle as well as a ritual. Of course, here, this is, I guess, like the regular way of thinking or approaching I know, a curatorial perspective, but or a curatorial work, open call, you talk with the artist, you create a selection, then you create a narrative for the space. But I would even argue that that's probably this exhibition that is one of the most recent one that I curated is probably one of the uh, most uncommon ones for me. I have throughout time, I have explored a lot the possibilities of online exhibitions, but not online exhibitions that want to recreate what happens outside of the screen, because I don't think that's necessarily the way to go. Um, this other exhibition that I want to share with you, Minimal Rituals, is very experimental in that sense, but it was very interesting for me to get to curate something like this. Minimal Rituals is a plug-in online exhibition that was part of the Mind, Body, and Soul program for Arabat Gallery. This is a gallery in London, but they also have, again, like an online program running. And Minimal Rituals, of course, had to do with rituals, but this is a plugin. This is an extension that you download into your browser, and basically what happens is that in a specific days and times of the day, you would get a pop-up, like I don't know if you remember, like this 2000s internet where you would have like random pop-ups, normally viruses or like things that would say like, oh, you won $1 million, just click here, go to this other website. And we kind of forgot about that experience because they became less and less common. So we wanted to bring those back, basically. But these new quote unquote viruses or pop-up screens are artworks. So what I did for this exhibition is that I selected artworks by Concepción Huerta, Vika Pacheco, César Chirinos, Ricardo Sierra, Flavia Visconte, Sebastián Mira, and Kira Shonorica, who work from within, music making and sound production to drawing to 3D modeling, net art, and writing. And I paired them up with Mónica Nepote. Mónica Nepote is a fantastic Mexican writer. And I asked her, so I first did the artwork selection, and then I asked her to write rituals for each artwork. So it was always a combination of something that Monica had written for a specific artwork that was only shown once within the schedule of the exhibition at a specific time of the day. So in this case, at 12 at noon, during 1 month, daily, you would get a series of artworks from either, of these artists and a ritual by Monica Nepote. So of course the invitation is to stop. The invitation is for your screen to become something else momentarily. This was an exhibition that I am very much aware that, required time, and asking someone for time when they are using their screens, whatever these screens might be, is a hard thing to ask. But we were trying to reconsider the space of the screen as this ritualistic place or this place where something else could also happen, right? So we had a bunch of rituals, 28 rituals to be specific. And something else that happened here is that we designed this exhibition for you not to be able to go back to the artworks that were shown the day before. So if you were not connected at noon, the specific day where this specific artwork that you wanted to see is on, then you would miss it. Because then again, I think that when we're thinking about online exhibitions, one of the big issues is that you feel that it's always going to be there, right? You say like, oh, I'll just get to it, eventually I'll just save the link. I promise I will navigate through it. But actually, there's a lot of things going on within our screens. So if we know and we convince ourselves that we're going to be back, we might as well never really be back, right? But when you have this, in a way, this boundary or this limitation where it's like, well, this is actually happening just this day, just as this at this specific time, right? I had a lot of people telling me, "Oh, I was freaking out. I downloaded the the exhibition plugin and I was writing an email, and then all of these pop-ups started, appearing on my screen. I was like, what is going on?" But that's exactly what I wanted for this exhibition, On one hand, to not really ask too much from the viewer, because I think that that's also an issue with online exhibitions, that you get there and then sometimes you don't really know how to navigate them if you are not super familiar with, yeah, screens basically, or online spaces or video games. There might be people who be like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to move from artwork to artwork. And, so here it was the other way around. Everything was prepared for you, launched for you, ready for you. And you just had to scroll, to pause and play, to close the tabs, the easy part, if you will. But also I wanted to create a sensation of having to stop for a second. I think that everything in terms of attention and lack of attention and the ways in which we have understood our attention span in the recent years is a very particular one. So I wanted to create a disruption for it. So that's the reason why we proposed with Aravite, um, that this was probably like a good way of finding an alternative to that. I'm not saying that this is the only or the best way of thinking about an online exhibition, of course, but it definitely allowed for us to think or to reconsider certain things that can still happen within a screen, as flat and as already used and explored as it feels sometimes. There's already opportunities, so we really wanted to do that. And the third one, last one that I want to share with you is this pretty hybrid from 2017. This is an exhibition that actually has a lot to do with border politics. This exhibition was called My World is Your Filter Bubble. I co-curated this show with Matthew Plomer Fernandez for Abandoned Normal Devices Festival, which is a festival that happens um, once every 2 years in the UK. It doesn't have a specific place where it happens. It normally happens on up north. In this case, it happened in Castleton, but we also presented this exhibition at Laboratorio Arte Alameda in Mexico City and at Barnaby Festival in Macclesfield in the UK as well. This show was basically an augmented reality exhibition. We created an app. We commissioned artwork that featured Diego Ortega, Alfredo Salazar Caro, Leslie Garcia, Marta Maya, who is also a fantastic artist from Tijuana, Arcángelo Constantini, and Gibran Morgado. And what we were exploring back then was the ways in which basically the internet exploded, and particularly the social media exploded. No, it exploded in our faces, and even though there was a lot of people saying, hey, we need to watch out, we need to get a sense of what's happening online, it wasn't until Trump won the elections and the Brexit happened that people really started thinking about critically about these spaces, and everywhere from forums and memes and the fake news and propaganda, of course, and so forth. There wasn't really a moment before that moment in time where we were actually critically considering the radicalization or polarization that was happening online and that really did pour into the streets, right? So what we proposed here was with this idea, we commissioned a new artwork uh, for these artists, from these artists, just for them to understand or to work around the idea of the filter bubble. Basically, a filter bubble happens when your algorithm, particularly when you navigate inside social media, but also in other like search engines, for instance, you get content that is in a way appropriate for you, right? So social media, what it really wants from you is attention. So it creates an algorithm, it learns from whatever it is that you like or you share or you comment, and shows you content that might be interesting for you, right? But by doing this, it erases what's happening outside of those boundaries. So when we name this, my wall is your filter bubble, because of course the conversation of the wall with Trump was very present, as if there wasn't a wall already there, right? Uh, we use that as a point of tension. And it was, of course, not casual that we added Leslie and Marta, who live the wall, throughout all of their lives, and then ways in which they relate to this wall, but also the, I don't know, like the virtual fences or the geo fences that happen online. Also, something that was very interesting for us, and this is just like something to add in for the conversation, is that I realized, as a Mexican in the UK, when I was doing this, I realized that when I set the wall, for me, the first thing that happened in my head was like, yeah, the border, right? Like the northern border between Mexico and the US. That was the first thing that came to my mind. But by saying the wall in the UK, most people thought about Facebook, because that's how it's named, your Facebook wall, right? And I had never really thought about that. And maybe it was just a coincidence that we were taking a critical perspective on social media. But that also people, when I said, oh yeah, the wall, they were like, yeah, yeah, like your Facebook wall where you put things, you post your stuff. I was like, oh my God, like, yes, of course, this is not something that really, ties into other narratives. I mean, this is not a shared perspective, of course. And that was also a way of breaking my own filter bubble. Um, so what we did here is that we had this exhibition happen outdoors. So we had no internet connection. Uh, like I said, we created an app, downloaded that app into a bunch of tablets that the festival rented, and we traced the physical border, digital border. It was like 1 kilometer long, something like that, and you had to walk. You had to walk from place to place, and by walking in this virtual fence, you would encounter the artworks. So the artworks were geolocated. The idea is for them to be geolocated in specific coordinates. So you wouldn't need to trigger those in any way. They would just appear on the screen. But if you were not nearby, this was an idea that we had with Pokemon Go, of course, but also when you have like a sculpture garden that you have to approach the artwork on the outdoors, we were thinking about this in that way. So that's the way it worked. So even if you downloaded this app back home, since you were not located physically on the places where these artworks were being geolocated, you could not be able to access them. And that was the whole point of like the critical part of the curatorial work that we did then. And I just really wanted to add this picture here, which is in Laboratorio Arte Alameda, where you see like this sphere here. This is a 3D no, 3D. This is a video. This is the video by Marta Maya. But this actually happened while Jaime Lobato was showing at Laboratorio Arte Alameda. So it was really nice because originally we were not planning to show, let's say, the exhibition. We were just planning to do a symposium, a small symposium, because they were already showing an exhibition there. This was a solo show by Jaime Lobato. But then we started speaking with Paloma, the curator of this show, and then we started speaking with Jaime, and they both loved the idea to have like a virtual exhibition invading the physical one. So that was a really cool thing that happened, and that's actually how I met Jaime. And we did the selection of the spaces for the artworks. We did that together so that actually the artworks came into conversation within the space. And I really enjoyed doing that. So there was something there, in terms of this flexibility and this hybrid side, but then also the fact that these artworks were really thought to be presented in a specific geography, even though these works were digital, fully digital. I try to rush into all of that. But I really want to make a space for comments or questions or anything that I can dive deeper into. I mean, if not, I can share with you like some of the issues that we face when doing this last exhibition that I showed you, because this is also, I don't know, I guess one of the things with working with technology in general is that a lot of exhibition spaces are very scared of technology. It's like, no, it's gonna break. It's never gonna be, accessible. It's not gonna turn on or turn off, or it's gonna do crazy things. And that's true. And that's also part of working with unstable media. And I think that's perfectly fine. A lot of these things, I find them very performatic in itself. So if you ask me, a lot of these is basically performance. Machines are also performing for us, and sometimes they don't want to work, and that's fine.
Hi Doreen. Thank you for sharing your body of curatorial work with us. I was wondering if you could talk about um, what the process is like for preserving or archiving these works, as some of them appear to be more experiences that people go out into and like, see in person and interact with things. Like, how do you approach uh, the preserving of these so that they can be shared in the future and perhaps have other people understand that we're not in there in person.
Well, for the first exhibition that I shared, I think it is pretty straightforward. But for my Wall is Your Filter Bubble, which was, AR, an app, but it's also something that happens only if you're on site. That's definitely a big part of the conversation. There's actually an amazing researcher and curator, Annette Decker, who has done a lot of work and research about these topics. And one of the ideas that I find very fascinating from her research is the idea of having a dynamic archive. So being able to share, in this case, from every perspective possible, but also to gather testimonies. So for the last exhibition, My Wall is Your Filter Bubble, what we had was as documentation was people who were using the app on site, then screen captures of the artwork presented, when you did that connection of being physically present where the artwork was at. Then we did a series of screen captures of the artwork, but the artwork isolated from the space. Let's say just, if it was a video, the screen cap of parts of the video. Um, with some of the 3D models, also like details or up close details of parts of the models, um, some screen recordings as well. And then we did a small interview. So the festival interviewed Matthew and myself as curators, as for us to show the audience basically how these app worked and how it looked like and how you could navigate it. And then what we also did by during this was on a festival, so we did it, throughout the weekend. We asked people, their feedback or their insight on what they experienced, and all of that body together is, part of the documentation, is of course just a memory of, for the representation, if you will. It can be readapted to other places as well. We, in a way, could just recreate exactly the same experience with different coordinates, which is what we did at the two other iterations that we had of the show. But in terms of documentation, I think that it has to be dynamic. It has to encompass as many formats as you can, so that it starts to make sense. Because if you don't, then it becomes impossible to share that with others. But again, one of the important parts for us was also to try and keep testimonies and feedback. Um, yeah, we try to keep those as well. And I guess from there, one of my favorite feedback was like a couple that said that it was as if they were looking through a window, and I really liked that because they felt like they were close to something, but perhaps not close enough that it becomes uncomfortable or that it becomes dangerous. So yeah, that was also part of that. But it's definitely a challenge. And I would even argue that there's artists who work with a lot of these unstable media who are very comfortable with the idea of these being thought more as a performance that might not be repeated. So in a way, there's artists that prepare something that will happen just as a specific exhibition or for a limited period of time. And I think thinking about, the environment as well, that's probably the most reasonable thing to do, and to just document what you get from that specific experience. And again, that's the reason why I come back to performance as a big idea around how to deal with a lot of these practices at large. Because, if you want to keep, let's say, a net art piece alive, then you will have to, pay yearly forever until the internet collapses, and that can become something very hard, to do. But that shouldn't be limiting for you as an artist if you really want to dive into these other techniques and media. So I would say that there's like different ways of approaching it, but in terms of the curatorial side, I would say I try to create a documentation that is broad enough and diverse enough that it allows for it to be revisited.
Yes, hi. So amazing, amazing presentation. I understand with logistics, planning, vigorous, technical arrangements, working with computers, machines. Do you embrace glitches?
I love glitches. Yes. Yes, I think I don't really believe in like the sterile version of digital media. I don't believe in that. I don't enjoy that. Again, trying to think about it as a performance, it also allows for the performance to just fail sometimes, or to become something else. And I think that's part of it. And particularly with the artists that I have had the opportunity to collaborate with, I think most of them, all of them, I would even say, have learned from failing. They do not have like this specific formation of saying like, yeah, I learned this in school, and this is the way I work, and this is the way I should be, interacting with these technologies. Actually, I think they're the other way around. They always find, by taking things apart and seeing what happens if you do this and that, or straight going into tutorials and see what comes up, from there, or talking with other people, or doing this and learning with others. I think is a big part of this artistic process, at least from within Latin America. And from what I have gathered, it has a lot to do with that. And of course, sometimes it has to do with you having an outcome or an output that you really, really like, but that you don't really know how you got there. And I think that's also something that it's very genuine about working with these technologies. And that really connects with this idea of the technological disobedience. The technological disobedience is a term that was proposed by Ernesto Orosa, who has done like really extensive research on Cuban technological disobedience. So basically, people who were creating antennas with like frying pans, or this kind of thing, which is of course not a way of saying like we should romanticize lack of accessibility. No, no, but we should definitely get to know what our devices are made of and how we can create our own devices. And I think that's something that you find a lot in the practice of these artists. They not only embrace these mistakes and glitches and errors, and these I don't know, I guess part of being the unstable media is just that, but also they try to understand their machines in such a way that it allows for them to build their own, even if conceptually. And I think that's, I don't know, I think that's what, I don't know, keeps me here doing what I do. I really, yeah, that's what really makes me passionate about it. Because I think that if things are too perfect, it's just boring. It's just not interesting for me,
Thank you.
at least.
Yeah, yeah. My question is do you can you think of a way you can monetize this type of work? I know NFTs was one type of you know archive that you can sell, buy and sell. Can you think of any other ways or something that you suggest maybe for the future
Mhm,
to be able to sell this type of work, maybe to museums, galleries, or how can they
mhm.
uh, make profit out of it? Or if you're not interested in that part, yeah, you can. Also, let me know your opinion.
Well, I think I'm not super knowledgeable of the art market myself, but from what I know about a lot of these artists is that they don't really, yeah, they don't really make a living by selling their art. I think that is because on one hand, it becomes very hard to sell something like this. It requires a lot of work to sell something like this. I would say that museums do more a much better job than private collectors in that sense, because in a way, selling artwork like this to museums that have already a collection that deals with video, for instance, or with sound work, it's easier because they already know that they have to keep these going. You know, they know that they have to have a specific set of copies. They know that they have to revisit the file every now and then. Of course, this is something that it's harder because, you know, selling to a museum is not as easy as saying, hey, I put this online and they'll just go see it. But some museums or art institutions do have acquisition prices. That's definitely something that's happening. I can think, for instance, about the Fundación Cisneros Fontanals that has a collaboration with Ars Electrónica. They have had this collaboration for a couple of years at least. They focus in arts and technology, generally speaking, but they also focus specifically in buying artwork from Latin American artists. So that's something that is happening. Then I think it's growing. I also think, for instance, that for me, even as a curator, it's easier to find funding if I'm gonna commission something from scratch, rather than trying to find some, you know, to present artwork that has already been done. I think that's a bit silly, you know, but I think that's definitely something that has happened to me as a curator. You know, I know that it is very hard to tell when you're creating a budget or applying for something, when you tell the institution or the whoever is um, funding this, that, you know, I'm going to be presenting artwork that is already out there, potentially even posted online. They're not going to be, you know, like very interested in that. Especially they're not going to be interested in paying for that. But if I tell them that this is going to be a commissioned new artwork that does this and that, and, you know, that might be a better chance as well to get them to pay for something like that. Um, Again, one of the things that I think most of these artists do is that they share and they sell what they know instead of what they do. So they share their knowledge, you know, they do a lot of workshops, they work with universities, they are part of public programs for bigger institutions. And of course, that's something that is being more and more common, and I'm very glad to see that happening, especially at a moment like the one that we're living on, right? Like, I've worked with people who have been dealing with AI for at the very least 10 years, and now this is like the hot topic, right? So everyone wants the person that already knows their way around AI, and you see them jumping into, you know, from creating workshops all the way into being the people who are, how can you say it? Like, not coaching, is not, that's not the word I'm looking for. Um, Mentoring projects. That's also something, you know, mentoring projects, sharing their knowledge, sharing their experience. That's also something that is very, very valuable. Um, and of course, finding a way to materialize some of their artworks is also a way, creating editions, limited editions, like, you know, the same way you would think about music, I don't know, like 30, 40 years ago, right? Like, how do you sell music? Well, you create a cassette or you create a compilation that you can sell, but also if you're buying or the cassette or the CD, you also have this other graphic work around it. I think there have been ways around that. I am currently working with an arts collection. It's called the Carist collection. I'm working as a advanced technologies advisor, and I can tell from my side that they are very interested as a collection that deals with contemporary art. They're very interested in buying artwork that looks like this and from artists that are working with these kind of technologies, normally they do buy it as an NFT. That's a fact. Like at least that from my experience, they do not ask the artist to put that out there on whatever NFT platform. If they like something, they would just buy it through an NFT, but they would do, let's say, all the work, because basically an NFT, uh, let's say, generally speaking, is it's just an agreement, right? It's an agreement. So yeah, that happens. But they're also interested in just buying the thing. Like they're very scared about these kind of practices because again, they're very unstable. But I don't know, for me, it's an absolute surprise to have, a collection that is like, yeah, we want people to nominate artwork for us to buy, which is basically what I do for them twice a year. I just nominate people. But again, I think that that's something that is becoming more common. I don't know. It's also because of taxes, if I'm honest. That's what I gather. Like, if I don't have to pay taxes for having this painting at my house, for them, it's like, yeah, cool. Like, I'll just take the digital file and I'm happy with it. And I can say this is mine. I don't know. It's what I have seen.